trouble started on a Tuesday morning, right when the air in the hallway felt thick and sticky from the old heating system. Leo was walking fast, his head down, clutching a plastic tray loaded with glass beakers and test tubes. He was heading to the science lab, which was at the far end of the building. He wasn't looking for trouble. In fact, Leo spent most of his time trying to be invisible. He wore a blazer that had belonged to his cousin 3 years ago. The sleeves were just a little too short, exposing his bony wrists, and the fabric was shiny in places where it had been ironed too many times. At 8:15 a.m., the hallway was crowded. It was a river of noise, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor, and shouts about homework or weekend plans. Leo hugged the wall, trying to stay out of the current. He just wanted to get to the lab before the bell rang. Then, it happened. A group of older students was walking the other way, laughing loudly about something. One of them, a tall boy named Jason who was on the football team, wasn't watching where he was going. He turned around to high-five a friend, and his elbow swung out wide. It caught Leo squarely in the shoulder. The impact wasn't enough to knock Leo over, but it was enough to make him stumble. His foot caught on the edge of the carpet runner near the office. Time seemed to move slowly then. Leo watched the tray tilt. He tried to grab it, to steady the load, but gravity was faster than his hands. The beakers slid. They hit the hard linoleum floor and exploded. It wasn't a quiet crash. It was a shattering sound that echoed down the long corridor, sharp and violent. Glass flew everywhere. But the worst part wasn't the glass. It was the dark blue chemical liquid that had been inside the beakers. It spilled across the pristine white floor, creating a massive, ugly stain. It looked like a dark bruise on the school's perfect skin. The hallway went silent instantly. It was that specific kind of silence that happens in a school when something breaks. Everyone stopped talking. Everyone stopped walking. 200 faces turned to look at Leo. Leo stood frozen in the middle of the mess. There were tiny shards of glass glittering on his sneakers. His hands were still hovering in the air, empty. He could feel his face getting hot. A cold sweat pricked at his hairline. "Nice one, loser," Jason muttered. He didn't even stop. He just kept walking, laughing with his friends as if nothing had happened. The crowd parted to let them through, then closed back in, staring at Leo. Leo didn't know what to do. Should he run? Should he try to clean it up with his bare hands? He just stood there, feeling small and exposed. Then, the door to the main office opened. It wasn't a heavy wooden door, just a simple painted one with a frosted glass window, but the sound of it clicking shut made everyone flinch. Principal Reynolds stepped out. He was a man who didn't smile often. He believed that the school was a brand, and the students were the representatives of that brand. He hated mess. He hated disorder. He walked into the hallway, and the students stepped back, creating a wide path for him. Reynolds looked at the floor. He looked at the dark blue spreading liquid. He looked at the broken glass. Then, he looked up, his eyes finding Leo's face. Leo swallowed hard. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say that Jason pushed him, that it was an accident. But the words died in his throat. Reynolds didn't look like he wanted an explanation. He looked at the stain the way a hunter looks at a wounded animal. "Who did this?" Reynolds asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It was flat and cold. "He tripped," someone whispered. "It was an accident," another voice said. Reynolds ignored them. He took a handkerchief out of his pocket and held it over his nose as if the chemical smell offended him personally. He gestured for the students to get to class. Grateful for the dismissal, the crowd dispersed, though many craned their necks to see what would happen next. Within a minute, the hallway was empty, leaving just Leo, the mess, and the principal. "Leo, isn't it?" Reynolds asked. He knew the name. He knew every student's name, but usually only when they were in trouble. Leo nodded. "Yes, sir." "Look at this floor," Reynolds said, pointing a polished shoe at the spill. "Do you have any idea how much this flooring costs? Do you understand that this is the first thing visitors see when they walk in?" "I'm sorry," Leo whispered. "I was carrying the equipment for Mr. Henderson, and I got bumped." "Excuses," Reynolds said, cutting him off. "There is always an excuse for carelessness. This isn't just a broken glass, Leo. This is a lack of respect for school property. This is a disruption." Reynolds looked at the boy standing in the too small blazer. He saw a target. He saw someone who wouldn't fight back. The principal was in a bad mood that morning. The school board had just denied his request for new office furniture, and he felt underappreciated. He needed to take control of something. He needed to make an example of someone. "Detention is too easy for you," Reynolds said, thinking out loud. "Cleaning this up is the bare minimum, but that doesn't teach you a lesson about dignity, does it?" Leo looked down at his shoes. He just wanted to disappear. He thought about the piano in the old music room. It was the only place he felt safe. He had been going there lately, during his free periods, just to touch the keys. It was his secret. He didn't think anyone knew. A strange look crossed Reynolds' face, a look that was almost a smile, but not a kind one. He remembered seeing a sign-up sheet for the upcoming talent showcase. He remembered seeing Leo's name near the piano list. "You like music, don't you?" Reynolds asked suddenly. Leo's head snapped up. He was surprised. "What, I play a little. But not really." "I've seen you in the music room," Reynolds said. He lied, actually. He hadn't seen him himself, but a secretary had mentioned a boy playing music after school. "We have that assembly coming up on Friday. The lunch hour entertainment. The orchestra cancelled." Leo's heart sank. He knew where this was going, but he prayed he was wrong. "Since you seem to have so much energy that you can't walk down the hallway without destroying school property, I think you owe the school something," Reynolds said smoothly. "You are going to play the piano at the assembly on Friday. In the atrium. During lunch." "Sir, I can't," Leo stammered. Panic rose in his chest. "I'm not good enough. I just play for fun. I can't play in front of everyone." "It's not a request, Leo," Reynolds said, his voice hardening. "You will play. Or, I can call your parents. I can tell them that you destroyed expensive school equipment. I can tell them that you are suspended for reckless behavior." The threat hung in the air. Leo's parents worked hard. They didn't have money for fines, and they certainly didn't need the stress of him getting suspended. He felt trapped. "But sir," Leo tried again, his voice shaking. "Everyone will laugh. They don't like me." "Then you better play well," Reynolds said, checking his expensive wristwatch. "Consider this your opportunity to make up for this disaster. Friday. 12:30 p.m. Don't be late." Reynolds turned and walked back into his office. He didn't tell Leo to clean up the glass. He didn't ask if he was cut from the shattered beaker. He just closed the door, leaving Leo alone in the silent, broken hallway. Leo looked at the blue stain on the floor. It was starting to dry, looking even uglier now. He felt tears stinging his eyes, but he blinked them away. He knew Reynolds wasn't doing this to help him. He was doing this to humiliate him. It was a public punishment. Leo bent down and carefully began to pick up the largest pieces of glass with his trembling fingers. The sharp edges bit into his skin a little, but he didn't care. He just wanted to clean the mess before the bell rang and the crowds came back. He felt a heavy weight settle in his stomach. Friday was only 3 days away. The thought of standing on the stage, with everyone watching, waiting for him to fail, made him feel sick. He finished picking up the big shards and went to find a broom. As he walked back to the janitor's closet, he could already hear the whispers in his head. He could see the smug look on Jason's face. He wasn't just a kid with a stained blazer anymore. He was the boy who was going to be the joke of the school. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next 2 days passed in a blur for Leo, but not in a good way. It felt like he was walking through a nightmare where everyone knew his secret but wasn't telling him. The incident in the hallway had spread through the school like wildfire. By Wednesday afternoon, the story wasn't just about a broken beaker, it had morphed into a legend. The blue spill was what people were calling it. Leo tried to keep his head down. He ate his lunch in the library, hiding behind a stack of books about ancient history. He walked to class with his shoulders hunched forward, trying to take up as little space as possible. But it didn't matter. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. He would hear giggling as he walked by, or see groups of students suddenly stop talking when he entered a room. He knew Principal Reynolds was watching him, too. On Thursday morning, Leo walked past the main office, and the principal was standing at the window, staring out with his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't wave or nod. He just watched, like a scientist observing a bug in a jar. It made Leo's skin crawl. Reynolds wanted this to happen. He wanted Leo to feel small. But it wasn't just the fear of the students that was eating at Leo. It was the music. For the last year, the old music room had been his sanctuary. It was a dusty, forgotten place at the top of the stairs, far away from the noisy gym and the crowded cafeteria. The piano there was out of tune, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them down, but Leo loved it. He loved it because when he played, he didn't have to be the poor kid in the hand-me-down clothes. He didn't have to be the kid who got bumped in the hallway. When he played, he was just sound. Now, that sanctuary had been ruined. Reynolds had turned it into a weapon. The thought of playing that piano in front of the entire school made Leo feel physically ill. His hands would start shaking every time he thought about it. How could he play when his fingers felt like jelly? How could he pour his heart out when 300 kids were waiting for him to mess up by Friday morning? The knot in Leo's stomach was so tight he could barely eat breakfast. He forced down a piece of toast and walked to school, dragging his feet. The air was crisp, but he felt cold. The school was buzzing with energy. Fridays were usually loud, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation. As Leo walked to his locker, he saw students pointing at the large digital notice board in the main hall. A new announcement had been added in bright red letters: special lunch performance, student talent showcase. All students report to the atrium. There was no escape. At 11:30 a.m., just before the lunch period began, the intercom crackled to life. Reynolds' voice filled every classroom and hallway. "Good morning, students," the voice said, smooth and commanding. "As part of our ongoing commitment to school spirit and sharing our unique gifts, we will be having a special musical performance during lunch today in the main atrium. Attendance is mandatory. Thank you. Leo was sitting in math class when the announcement ended. The boy next to him, a kid named Sam who usually slept through class, turned and grinned. "Hey, Leo," Sam whispered. "I hear you're the big star today." Leo felt his face turn red. He looked down at his notebook, wishing he could sink through the floor. "I'm not a star," he mumbled. "I'm just doing it because I have to." "Sure, whatever you say," Sam laughed, turning back to his phone. The bell rang for lunch a few minutes later. It was the worst sound Leo had ever heard. It felt like a starting gun for a race he didn't want to run. Students poured out of the classrooms, pushing and shoving, eager to see what the show was about. They didn't know it was Leo well, most of them didn't, but they knew there was a show. Leo waited until the hallway was almost empty. He gathered his sheet music, clutching the folder so hard the edges bent. He walked slowly toward the atrium. The atrium was the heart of the school, a large, open space with a high glass ceiling and carpeted steps where students liked to sit. As he got closer, the noise grew. It was a roar of voices, shouting, laughing, and eating. Leo stood at the edge of the crowd, near a pillar, and peeked out. The place was packed. Every seat on the carpeted steps was taken. Students stood along the walls. Some were even sitting on the floor. In the center of the room, on a slightly raised platform, sat the school's best grand piano. It was black and shiny, reflecting the lights from above. It looked beautiful, but to Leo, it looked like a guillotine. Principal Reynolds was standing next to the piano, holding a microphone. He was wearing his best suit, and he looked very pleased with himself. He was enjoying the crowd, enjoying the power he had to make everyone stop what they were doing and listen. "Welcome, everyone." Reynolds' voice boomed over the speakers, echoing off the glass ceiling. The crowd quieted down a little, but there was still a lot of whispering. "Today, we have a special treat. One of your fellow students has volunteered to share his musical talents with us. It is important that we support each other and respect the courage it takes to perform." Lies. Every word was a lie. Leo felt angry for a second, but the fear quickly washed the anger away. He couldn't stay hidden behind the pillar forever. Reynolds looked around, scanning the crowd, his eyes searching for Leo. "Ah, there he is," Reynolds said, spotting him by the wall. The crowd turned to look. A path opened up, like the Red Sea parting, but there was no mercy in their eyes, only curiosity. "Come on up, Leo. Don't be shy." The walk to the center felt like the longest walk of his life. Leo stepped out from behind the pillar. He saw faces he recognized. Jason, the football player, was sitting on the front step, chewing gum with a smirk on his face. Girls were whispering behind their hands. Boys were nudging each other and laughing. Leo kept his eyes on his shoes. He walked through the aisle they made for him. He could feel his heart beating against his ribs like a trapped bird. Thump thump. Thump thump. He thought he might pass out before he even reached the bench. He climbed the 2 steps up to the platform. The lights felt hotter here. He could smell the floor wax and the faint scent of the cafeteria food drifting in from nearby. It was suffocating. Principal Reynolds handed him the microphone for a second, just for a formal introduction, but Leo shook his head. He couldn't speak. If he opened his mouth, he thought he might throw up. Reynolds shrugged, taking the mic back. "A modest performer," he told the crowd. "He prefers to let the music speak." Reynolds stepped back, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The message was clear: Let's see what you've got, kid. Leo sat down on the bench. It was leather and cold. He placed his folder on the music rack. His hands were shaking so badly that the papers rattled. He could hear a murmur of laughter rippling through the crowd. They saw his shaking hands. They knew he was terrified. To them, this was entertainment. They were waiting for him to fail. They were waiting for him to play a wrong note, or to cry, or to run away. Leo looked at the keys. They were white and black, sharp and clean. For a moment, he couldn't remember how to play. His mind went blank. The panic was a wall of noise in his head. I can't do this. I can't do this. He looked out at the sea of faces. Hundreds of them. All staring. All waiting. Then, he looked up and saw the high glass ceiling. Above the noise, above the smirks and the whispers, the sky was a bright, endless blue. It looked calm. Leo took a deep breath. He thought about his grandmother. She used to tell him that music wasn't about the people listening. It was about the truth. It was about what was inside. He closed his eyes for a second to block them out. Just for a second. He let his hands hover over the keys. He didn't play the simple song Reynolds expected. He didn't play the happy tune that the school band usually played. He decided to play the song that lived in his chest. The song that was heavy and sad and real. He lowered his fingers. The room was so loud you could hear a pin drop, but not for long. Leo was about to change everything. The noise in the large room was overwhelming. It wasn't just the sound of 300 students talking and eating, it was the feeling of their energy. It bounced off the high glass ceiling and the tiled floors, creating a buzzing wall of sound that pressed against Leo's ears. He sat on the bench, his back straight but his insides feeling like liquid. To his left, Principal Reynolds leaned against the wall, checking his watch, looking bored. To his front, the sea of students was restless. Someone threw a crumpled napkin. It landed near the piano leg. A few people laughed. Leo looked at the keys. They were white, smooth, and perfect. They looked like teeth in a giant mouth. For a terrifying moment, his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember a single note. His fingers felt numb, as if they didn't belong to his body. He thought about standing up and running. He could push past the microphone stand, run down the steps, and out the double doors at the back of the room. He could hide in the bathroom until the bell rang. He could go home and never come back. But then he looked up and saw Jason, the boy who had shoved him 3 days ago. Jason was sitting on the front step, surrounded by his friends. He had his legs stretched out, taking up space. He wasn't laughing. He was just looking at Leo with a bored, expectant look, like he was waiting for a TV show to start. That look of ownership, like Leo was just a toy for his amusement, made something harden inside Leo's chest. He wasn't running. Leo closed his eyes. He took a breath that filled his lungs all the way to the bottom. He blocked out the smell of pizza and the squeak of sneakers on the floor. He thought of the old, dusty upright piano in the music room. He thought of the evenings at home when the house was quiet. He wasn't in the atrium anymore. He was alone. His right hand moved. It wasn't a decision, it was a reflex. His fingers found the keys. The first note wasn't soft. It was sharp. It cut through the air like a knife through hot butter. Ping. It was a high A note, crystal clear and ringing. Because the room had been so loud with talking, the sudden sound of a single, pure musical note acted like a spell. It was unexpected. It was so different from the noise of the cafeteria that the human brain couldn't ignore it. The effect was instant. Right near the front, a girl named Chloe stopped chewing her gum. The sound vibrated in her chest. Next to her, a boy named Sam froze with his soda can halfway to his mouth. The talking didn't stop all at once, it faded out like a radio being turned down. A hush started in the center and rippled outward. Leo didn't notice the silence yet. His eyes were still closed. He played the next few notes. They were slow, heavy chords. He wasn't playing the pop song everyone expected. He wasn't playing the happy school anthem. He was playing a piece his grandmother had loved. It was a classical piece, complicated and deep. It was music that sounded like a conversation, like someone asking a question and not getting an answer. As the melody grew, the room transformed. The students who had been laughing and whispering a minute ago were now still. The contrast was shocking. 1 minute it was chaos, the next, it was a sanctuary. The silence that fell over the crowd wasn't the awkward silence of a library. It was the silence of awe. It was heavy and thick. Principal Reynolds, who had been checking his watch, stopped. He looked up, his eyebrows pulling together. He hadn't expected this. He expected Leo to fumble, to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or to freeze up and cry. He expected a humiliation that would prove his point about order and discipline. But this was actual music. This was beautiful. Leo opened his eyes, but he didn't look at the crowd. He looked at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. As soon as the music started, the fear had leaked out of his fingertips. His hands knew what to do even when his brain was scared. He pressed down on the pedals, and the sound of the piano swelled. It filled the entire atrium. The low notes vibrated the floor. The high notes floated up to the ceiling. In the back of the room, a group of seniors who usually ignored everyone looked up from their phones. They stopped texting. They just listened. The music was sad, but it wasn't depressing. It was the kind of sadness that feels good, like a cold drink when you are thirsty. It felt honest. It felt real. Leo began to play faster. The rhythm changed. It became urgent, like a heartbeat racing. He leaned over the keys, his small body swaying slightly. The two short sleeves of his blazer rode up, exposing his thin wrists again, but nobody was laughing at his clothes now. Nobody was looking at his blazer. They were looking at the boy creating magic. He hit a series of notes that climbed higher and higher, getting faster and louder. It sounded like a storm building up. The tension in the music made the students lean forward. They stopped breathing for a moment. It felt like the piano was screaming, letting out all the frustration and loneliness that Leo kept bottled up inside. He thought about the stain on the floor. He thought about the way Reynolds looked at him like he was dirt. He poured all of that anger into the keys. He struck them harder than he ever had before. The sound was aggressive and strong. Jason, on the front step, shifted his weight. He stopped chewing his gum. He looked at Leo's hands, which were moving so fast they looked like a blur. Jason had never seen anyone play like that. It was intense. It was kind of scary. For the first time, Jason looked at Leo not as a target, but as a person. He realized that the quiet kid in the hallway had a whole world inside him that Jason knew nothing about. The music reached a peak. It was loud, crashing, and chaotic. And then, suddenly, Leo lifted his hands off the keys. Silence rushed back in. But it was a different kind of silence now. The last notes of the chord echoed in the air, hanging there like mist. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights overhead. 300 people held their breath, waiting for the next note, afraid that if they made a sound, the spell would break. Leo sat there, his chest rising and falling fast. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. He was terrified to open his eyes fully. He didn't want to see their faces. He didn't want to see them laughing. He thought maybe he had played too loud. He thought maybe he had made a fool of himself after all. He kept his head down, looking at the black and white keys, waiting for the shoe to drop. Waiting for the booing. Waiting for Jason to shout something stupid. But the atrium remained quiet. It was the quietest the school had ever been. The silence was heavy with respect. It was a moment where time seemed to stop. The boy who wanted to be invisible had just made himself seen in the most powerful way possible, and he didn't even know it yet. He just sat on the bench, scared and small, while the ripples of the music washed over the room, changing everything. The silence stretched on. It wasn't just a quiet moment, it was heavy, pressing down on the ears of every student in the room. In a school that was never truly silent, filled with the hum of electricity, the shuffling of feet, and the constant murmur of gossip, this absolute stillness felt unnatural. The last note of the piano had faded into the air, but the feeling of the music was still trapped in the high ceiling, refusing to leave. Leo sat frozen on the bench. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly now that the music had stopped. He was terrified to turn around. He was convinced that the silence meant they were confused. He thought they were waiting for the punchline, or maybe they were just getting ready to laugh. In his mind, he was still the boy in the ill-fitting blazer who had shattered glass in the hallway. He expected to hear a whisper, a giggle, or a cruel remark from Jason. But there was nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, wishing he could dissolve into the air. He had poured his soul out, exposed his rawest emotions to 300 people who barely knew he existed, and now he felt empty and scared. He thought about standing up and running off the stage, but his legs felt like lead. Then, a sound broke the quiet. It wasn't a laugh. It wasn't a boo. It was the sound of someone clearing their throat. It came from the back of the room. A tall senior named David, who usually sat with the cool crowd and never paid attention to anyone like Leo, stood up. David had been eating an apple when Leo started playing, and he had simply forgotten to keep chewing. Now, he looked at the small boy on the stage with a look of genuine shock. David slowly put his hands together. Clap. It was a single, loud clap. It echoed sharply against the glass walls. Leo flinched at the sound, hunching his shoulders even more, waiting for the mockery to follow. But then, another sound joined it. A girl on the front row, the one who had been whispering to her friends earlier, stood up. She clapped too. Then her friends stood up. Within 5 seconds, the silence shattered. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a wave of noise that started as a ripple and turned into a roar. It was the sound of 300 students realizing they had just witnessed something incredible. Leo opened his eyes, blinking rapidly. He turned his head slightly to the left, toward the crowd. He didn't see sneers. He saw faces filled with surprise and respect. They were clapping for him. Some were whistling. A few were even standing on their seats to get a better look at him, as if they couldn't believe that such a big sound came from such a small person. The noise was overwhelming, but for the first time all day, it didn't scare Leo. It felt warm. It felt like a blanket. Principal Reynolds, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, slowly lowered his arms. His plan had failed completely. He looked confused. He looked at the students, who were supposed to be mocking Leo, and instead saw them giving him a standing ovation. The principal's face turned a shade of red that matched the school tie. He clapped his hands once, sharply, trying to regain control, but no one looked at him. All eyes were on the piano. Leo didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to attention. He felt a lump in his throat, thick and hard. He realized he couldn't sit there anymore. He stood up slowly. His legs felt wobbly, like a newborn deer. He gave a small, awkward nod to the room. He didn't smile, he was too shocked for that, but he didn't look down either. For a split second, he looked them in the eye. Then, he turned and hurried away. He didn't take his sheet music. He didn't wait for Reynolds to dismiss him. He just needed to get out of that bright light. He walked down the steps from the platform. As he passed the front row, the clapping got louder. Jason, the football player, was still sitting there. He wasn't clapping, but he wasn't laughing either. He just watched Leo walk by with a strange look on his face, almost like he was seeing a ghost. He moved his legs out of the way, letting Leo pass without tripping him this time. Leo moved through the crowd. A path opened up for him again, but it was different now. Before, the path was made of avoidance, people stepped back to get away from the troublemaker. Now, they stepped back to give him room. They reached out as he passed, some of them patting him on the back or touching his shoulder. It wasn't rough. It was gentle. "Good job, man," someone said. "That was insane," a girl whispered as he went by. Leo couldn't speak. He just kept moving, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt dizzy. He pushed through the double doors at the back of the atrium and stepped into the cool hallway of the main school building. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off the roar of the applause. The silence in the hallway was instant and peaceful. He leaned back against the metal lockers, letting out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 days. He looked down at his hands. They were still trembling, but now he knew it wasn't from fear. It was the adrenaline. He looked at his wrists, poking out of the short sleeves. He felt different. He felt lighter. He realized he had left his music folder on the piano. He didn't care. Let them have it. He didn't need the notes anymore. He knew the music was inside him, not on the paper. Leo started walking toward his next class, which was history. He knew he was going to be late. He knew the teacher might be mad. But for the first time in his life, the thought of getting in trouble didn't scare him. He walked a little taller. He didn't hunch his shoulders. The corridor seemed brighter, the colors more vivid. As he turned the corner, he saw a janitor pushing a cart. The janitor looked at Leo, then at the empty space where the tray of beakers had shattered 3 days ago. The floor was spotless now. You couldn't tell there had ever been a mess. The janitor nodded at him. "Heard the noise, kid," he said gruffly, but with a hint of a smile. "Sounded pretty good." Leo stopped. He looked at the old man, surprised. "Thanks," Leo said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't squeak. He kept walking. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back of the class. He was the boy who played the piano. He was the boy who had silenced the school. He walked into the history room, and when he took his seat, the whole class turned to look at him. There were a few smiles and a few nods of respect. Leo didn't put his head down. He took out his notebook, opened it to a blank page, and picked up his pen. He was ready for whatever came next. The stain on the floor was gone, and so was the stain on his reputation. The bell rang at the end of the day, signaling freedom. For most students, it was just the end of another Tuesday. But for Leo, it felt like the end of a completely different life. He walked out of the main doors and stepped into the cool afternoon air. It felt fresh against his face, washing away the stuffy heat of the crowded hallways. As he walked toward the bus loop, he noticed the atmosphere around him had shifted. It wasn't a loud change, but it was there. Before, students would walk past him as if he were a ghost, or worse, a target. Today, eyes followed him. When he walked by a group of freshmen whispering near the bike rack, they didn't giggle. They just looked at him with wide eyes, like they were trying to solve a mystery. One boy gave him a quick, shy thumbs up. Leo blinked, surprised, and gave a tiny nod back. He got on his bus and moved to the back, his usual spot. He put his backpack on his lap and stared out the window. The bus rumbled and shook, but Leo felt a strange stillness inside. He looked at his hands resting on the nylon fabric of his bag. They looked the same as they had that morning, pale, thin, with bitten fingernails. But he knew they were different now. They had done something powerful. When he got home, the house was quiet. His mother was still at work, and his younger brother was at a friend's house. Leo dropped his bag on the floor of his bedroom and sat on the edge of his bed. He looked at the poster of a famous pianist on his wall, something he had stared at 1,000 times wishing he could be that good. Today, he didn't feel like wishing, he just felt tired. The next morning, the true weight of what happened began to settle in. Leo walked into school wearing the same blazer, but he didn't feel the urge to pull the sleeves down over his wrists. He walked down the main hallway, the same hallway where he had fallen 3 days ago. He looked at the spot on the floor. The janitor had done an amazing job. There was no trace of the blue chemical stain. It was just white linoleum again, as if the accident had never happened. But the accident had happened. And because of it, everything was different. As he approached his locker, he saw Jason standing there with a group of friends. Leo's heart gave a familiar little flutter of anxiety. Old habits die hard. He tightened his grip on his books and prepared to sidestep them, to shrink away like he usually did. Jason looked up. He saw Leo. The group got quiet for a second. Jason looked at Leo, then at the floor, then back at Leo. He didn't smirk. He didn't stick his foot out. He actually looked a little uncomfortable. He shifted his weight and mumbled something that sounded like "move up," to his friends, clearing a path for Leo to get to his locker. Leo walked past them. He didn't run. He didn't look down. He unlocked his locker, put his books away, and took out a pen. As he closed the metal door, he heard Jason speak behind him. "Hey," Jason said. It wasn't mean. It was just loud. Leo turned around slowly. "Yeah. That song yesterday," Jason said, looking at his sneakers. "What was it?" Leo was surprised. He hadn't expected a conversation. "It's called Elegy. It's by a composer named, well, it doesn't matter. It's just an old song." It was loud, Jason said. "In a good way, I mean. My mom plays piano, but she plays boring stuff." "You sounded, I don't know, real." "Thanks," Leo said. He didn't know what else to say. Jason nodded once and turned back to his friends. The moment was over, but it was enough. The giant who had haunted Leo's school life had just shrunk down to normal size. Jason was just a guy. Leo was just a guy who played music. The biggest change, however, was waiting for him in the music room later that day. Leo went there during his free period, needing to feel the keys again. He expected the room to be empty, like always. But when he opened the door, he saw that there were already 3 students sitting in the corner. Leo froze. Usually, he would have turned around and left. He didn't like an audience when he was practicing. But before he could back out, one of the students, a girl named Chloe who played the flute, stood up. "Hi," she said. She seemed nervous. "We were wondering if we could listen. We won't talk. We just want to hear." Leo looked at them. They looked hopeful. They weren't looking at the weird kid in the old blazer anymore. They were looking at a musician. "Sure," Leo said. "But I'm just practicing. I make mistakes." "We don't care," Chloe smiled. Leo walked over to the dusty upright piano. He sat down on the bench. It felt different now. It wasn't a hiding spot anymore. It was a place where he could connect with people. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. It wasn't the performance piece. It was just a simple melody he was trying to learn. But as he played, he could feel the room filling up. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of listening. In the main office, Principal Reynolds sat at his desk. He was signing papers, but his mind wasn't on his work. He looked out his window, which faced the parking lot. He saw students walking by, laughing and talking. The school was running smoothly. There were no fights, no messes in the hall. Reynolds thought about the assembly. He thought about the way the students had looked at Leo, and the way they looked at him, the principal, when they applauded. He realized that he had tried to use power to control a student, but the student had used art to change the school. Reynolds felt a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't pride, exactly. It was a grudging respect. He looked at the disciplinary report on his desk for Leo, the one about the broken beakers. He picked up the paper, looked at it for a long moment, and then slipped it into the shredder beside his desk. The machine whirred and chewed up the paper. It was gone. Leo walked out of the music room an hour later. The hallway was filling up with students getting ready to go home. As he walked toward the exit, he realized he wasn't walking with his head down. He was looking forward. He saw the faces of the students passing by, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was on the outside looking in. He wasn't the most popular kid in school. He wasn't a superhero. He was still Leo, the quiet boy who liked old music. But the world was a little bigger now. He knew that even if he had a short blazer and empty pockets, he had something inside him that was worth hearing. He pushed open the heavy exit doors and stepped into the sunshine. He took a deep breath. The air smelled like cut grass and freedom. He adjusted his backpack on his shoulders and started walking home. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was just ready to play.